It's Sunday, which means it's time for Nick to start explaining things about anime. And in this week's chapter, we're going to be covering a little known group as the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist. Publicly, not a whole lot is known about the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, but I'm going to impart to you the knowledge that I know from multiple hours and days of sleuthing through Naruto lore. And yes, of course, if we're covering the swordsmen, we're going to talk about the Seven Swords of the Mist. So kick back, relax, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Here's the thing about the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist. There's been like 4 generations of them. We only know 2, and one of them is from Boruto, and it's kind of a one-off arc. We're not talking about them. No, we're talking about the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist that we know, we see, and we love in Naruto and Naruto Shippuden. Most importantly, we're talking about them though because they are considered the strongest group of Seven Swordsmen of the Mist ever. In fact, the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist are said to be so powerful that they alone can take down an entire nation, or strong enough to take on one Might Guy's father, since it was when Might Guy and his team, which comprised of Ebisu and one other ninja, were on a mission in the land of water that they were cornered by the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist. Might Guy came to their rescue and activated the 8th gate, the first person in canonical lore that we know to do this. And in that 8th gate form, he killed 6 out of 7 of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, at least in the manga. In the anime, technically 3 of them survive. The only member to survive in the manga is Fukugi, the original wielder of Samehada before Kisame, you know. But we're not going to get into all that right now. No, you know the way we do explained videos. We start with the weakest and we make our way to the strongest. So with no further ado, let's get to the weakest entry on this list, Jinan. Jinan is the wielder of the Kabutawari, which isn't a sword, okay? It's an axe and a hammer tied together. How is that a sword? What it is, though, is said or rumored to be, at least by Jinan, to be the strongest offensive sword of all of the Seven Swords of the Mist. But why? Why is it the strongest offensively? I mean, there's literally a sword that's a shark on a stick. How? This is because Jinan says that it's able to break any defense. When the combination of the axe landing and the hammer hitting it behind it is supposed to be able to break any defensive scheme. I'd love to see it go up against a Susanoo, but that's neither here nor there. It's because of this, though, that the sword is referred to as the helmet splitter, because it's supposed to be able to break any defense. On top of this, in the anime, we see Jinan use the hammer alone to strike the ground and create an incredible blast that blows people away. Jinan himself was said to be very heroic in his life and reveled in murdering people. Those 2 things don't really line up, but that's what they say. And while the Kabutawari does have incredible offensive prowess, it was Kakashi himself that noted that it had no real defensive abilities, and that Jinan was also very slow and offensively minded. Therefore, anybody who was fast enough would be able to counterattack the Kabutawari before the axe and the hammer could even fall, and that's what Kakashi did. Since we're talking about swords that aren't swords, this brings us to our next entry on the list, Jinpachi. Now, Jinpachi's also a very interesting installment to the list. He's one of the few people that we have some semblance of a backstory about, and that backstory is he's an incredibly cruel man who murdered his older brother. But then again, if you think about the weapon that he wields, it kind of makes sense. That weapon being the Shibuki, because you have to be a mean man in order to wield a kind of axe that has a roll of limitless paper bombs that blast whenever you strike somebody. And that is exactly what the Shibuki is. It's essentially an axe with limitless paper bombs that roll and refresh after every time you strike. It's like Conan's plan to beat Obito, but mobile. Jinpachi uses this literal boomstick to defend and attack willy-nilly. I say willy-nilly because the Shibuki can very easily injure those who use it. It is an explosion at arm's length away. In fact, this is the reason Jinpachi has one eye, because when he first started using Shibuki, he exploded it too close to himself and debris got lodged in. I also say willy-nilly because he uses it around his teammates very kind of carelessly, exploding it near them like he didn't care whether or not they get hurt. This applies most exclusively to his kind of teammate, I guess, Kushimaru, who was the wielder of the needle. But on top of almost exploding his teammates, he could also use long distance explosion techniques, and he could use the Shibuki to strike the ground and use massive AoE explosions that would clear out areas. But since we were talking about his teammate Kushimaru, let's get into talking about his teammate Kushimaru. Kushimaru's sword and just personality is about as diametrically opposed as you could be from our previous entry. Kushimaru was the wielder of the Nubari, or the needle, and he is probably the meanest and scariest person on this list. Long and gangly in appearance, he would revel in the torturous death of his enemies. In fact, his favorite move was to sew people into crucifixions so he could slowly murder them. In fact, in the anime, we see him using senbon in wire traps in order to cut the feet off of his enemies so he can slowly torture them to death. He's so evil, he killed his sensei, which is actually not the only person to do this on this list. As in, for the Nubari itself, it is literally just a needle with a ton of wire connected to the back of it. And they're carrying like 300 yards of thread. We never see it though. The Nubari is also the fastest of all of the 7 swords of the mist and is incredibly deadly when used in conjunction with hidden and mist technique, because it's very hard to see a needle in the mist. In fact, it's so powerful that we see this needle give Chojiro a solid amount of trouble when it's used by the second yielders of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist in the Boruto Hidden Mist Village arc. And those yielders weren't even nearly as powerful as Kushimaru. And while the Nubari was the fastest amongst the 7 Swords of the Mist, it wasn't the sharpest. No, that honor goes to the Kiba blades, which are regarded as the sharpest swords ever created. And those swords were wielded by Amiori Ringo. Amiori kind of has a tragic backstory, I guess, for somebody who's kind of evil. She, like Itachi, had an incurable disease that killed her at a young age, which I guess technically saved her from dying at Might Dai's hands, which is good. She's shown to be incredibly playful. She likes people who can stand their grounds and give her a good fight. She refers to them as meals. In fact, her favorite person to fight that we ever see was Amoi, who she enjoyed fighting so much that she gifted the Kiba blades to him and promised that they would meet each other in the afterlife. And she had every right to be playful. She was incredibly powerful in her lightning release, being able to charge it into her Kiba blades in order to make them the sharpest blades ever produced. This is because with the lightning release that the Kiba blades naturally have an affinity for, you can cut through anything. Think of how Killer Bee was able to cut through the Executioner blades by adding lightning release to one of his 8 blades. On top of this, she was an incredibly talented tracker and was able to kill 100 Chunin, 1 on 100 in the war arc. On top of this, she could also shoot individual lightning bolts with her Kiba blades that would strike down on people with great precision. Or she could blast her lightning in all directions and devastate entire landscapes. But she had one of the most powerful swords of the 7 Swords of the Mist. You know who didn't have one of the most powerful swords? Juzo, because he had the Executioner blade, which is almost useless. As a caveat, it is literally my favorite sword in Naruto and probably in anime in general, but like, I'll explain why it's useless in a second. First up, Juzo, anime-only character. Juzo was a member of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist when Might Dai kind of murdered all of them, and because he got scared by that, he defected from the land hidden in the water and joined the Akatsuki. It was at that point that he got teamed up with, and stop me if you've heard of this person, a person by the name of Itachi Uchiha. And while out on a mission with the Akatsuki in the land of water where he is from, he was stopped by Yagura and a group of hidden mist shinobi. Yagura, the 4th Mizukage, also the perfect Jinchuriki of Isobu, was like, hey, you can't be here. I gotta fight you now. Juzo and Itachi managed to take out all of the hidden mist shinobi, but obviously Yagura, who is very powerful, is left. Yagura then activates a second form Jin Cloak and shoots a tailed beast bomb at Juzo, which he tries to deflect with the Executioner blade, and that's just not enough. The Executioner blade snaps and then kind of bisects Juzo and pins him to a tree. Itachi, then being Itachi, defeats Yagura and they pull out Isobu, and then Akatsuki plans are moving forward. But Juzo dies at the hands of his own sword. He was very talented in water release and he was able to, you know, fight off a bunch of hidden mist shinobis and be in a fight with Yagura, which makes me believe that he was very powerful. On top of that, he did all of that with only the Executioner blade, which I'm now going to cover why it's kind of useless. The Executioner blade's ability is, it's big and it can heal itself. What do I mean it can heal itself? It can use the iron from blood, and it can fix itself if it splits, cracks, or chips. But it's also 6 foot long and made of steel, so it shouldn't be breaking in the first place. So it's really just the sword, but god damn it, does it look cool. Speaking of looking cool, the next entry doesn't, but he is the only man who survived Might Dai's 8th gate in the manga. We got Fukugi. Fukugi is the strongest of the unknowns in the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist, being the yielder of Samehada prior to Kisame. Essentially what we know about him is that he was very loyal to the Mist Village. At least that's what he told Kisame. Because when he recruited Kisame to join him in the Cypher Corps, there was a mission that Kisame got sent on in order to protect 2 people who had valuable information to the Hidden Mist Village. He essentially told Kisame that, hey, listen, this information is very important, but if you guys get caught, I need you to murder these people because that information cannot get out. And guess what happened? They got caught by Konoha specifically, and more specifically than that, Ibuki, the head of interrogation and torture for Konoha, which we don't talk about the fact that Konoha has a head of interrogation and torture. Maybe they're not the good guys. So Kisame murders the 2 people, heads back to the Mist Village after escaping. And then what does he find out? That Fukugi, the dude who just told him that the information he was protecting was important, has been selling village secrets to other villages. Kisame literally has blood on his hands, and it was for nothing. So he murders Fukugi and steals Samehada. Fukugi was massive in stature, very tall, very wide, and he was also very powerful. Obviously, he had to be. He was the wielder of Samehada, a sentient sword that chooses the person it wants to wield it. A sword so powerful that it can cut people and constantly absorb the chakra from the cut. A sword so sentient that it mourns Kisame's death and will spit spikes out of the handle if somebody it doesn't like picks it up. But we'll talk more about Samehada when we talk about Kisame. Fukugi could also harden his hair, much like Jiraiya, and fire out Senmon-like needles, like Jiraiya's needle Juzo. Something about long hair in Naruto. If you got it, it's a weapon. And you would think that his large size and stature would inhibit his ability to be stealthy, but you'd be wrong, because he could still murder people in absolute silence while hidden in mist. But since we're talking about using hidden in mist jutsu, that brings us to our next entry on the list, Zabaza Momochi, who is my favorite character in all of Naruto, maybe outside of Minato. The fact that Zabaza is so high on this list with a sword kind of as useless as the Executioner Blade speaks to his raw power in volume. Zabaza was a talented shinobi from the Blood Mist Village during its worst period. Yagura, while under the genjutsu of Obito that trumped up his bloodlust, would pit the village's most talented shinobi against each other in 1v1s to the death to see who would be the next member of the 7 Swords of the Mist. And in these death matches, Zabaza murdered more than 100 hidden mist ninja. This earned him the title Demon of the Mist, but it also largely disenfranchised him to the Hidden Mist Village, so much so that he actually gathered a group of people together in order to accomplish a coup d'etat against Yagura. Unfortunately, the coup d'etat failed and he was betrayed by one of his own. It was because of this that he defected from the Hidden Mist and kind of ran away with Haku and the Demon Brothers. But Zabaza himself is actually one of the most physically strong people we see in the entirety of Naruto. We have known 4 people to wield the Executioner Blade. None of them were able to wield it as long and as effectively as Zabaza without fatigue, which means that physically he had either better stamina or strength than Kakashi, Suigetsu's older brother, and Juzo. Suigetsu's older brother is Mengetsu. He's literally on the list. On top of that, Zabaza has some of the most powerful water release we've seen in the show outside of maybe Tobirama, being able to use Water Dragon Bullet, Giant Waterfall Technique, and Water Prison. On top of that, he is probably the best user of the Hidden in Mist Jutsu. So much so that Kabuto sacrificed other pawns that he had revived in order to keep Zabuza alive so he could keep the Hidden in Mist Jutsu up during the war arc. I mean, the man killed like 40 of Gado's men with a kunai in his mouth and his feet. His arms didn't work. I still don't think he deserves to die, but his death is the reason that Naruto hooked me. Hey, remember that guy whose name I literally just forgot? Mangetsu? Yeah, he's next.
What do you mean he's stronger than Zabaza? He has no feats.
How about the feat of being able to yield all 7 swords of the mist during the strongest generation of the 7 swords mist users? That means he either had to fight them in order to use their blades long enough to become proficient in it, or he simply just, I don't know, asked politely. Regardless, it's kind of crazy. But on top of that, he's a Hozoki. And the Hozokis are able to liquefy any part of their body in order to avoid physical attacks. It's like Kamui, except you can do it to any part of your body and it won't degrade your eye, which means he can also use a water bullet technique that allows him to shoot high velocity water bullets out of his fingers, just like the second Mizukage. This also means, because he mastered all 7 swords, that Samehada liked him enough to let him wield it. And that does not happen a lot. After Mangetsu, we have Chojiro. And I know what you're saying.
You didn't involve Swagetsu, but you're involving Chojiro? What is that?
Swagetsu technically never had a connection to the Hidden Mist Village while being a wielder of the 7 swords. Therefore, he was never technically a 7 swordsman of the mist. He was just a guy with some swords. But Chojiro was the wielder of the Himikorai, which is a dual split sword. It's implied that this was Mangetsu's sword that he inherited after Mangetsu's death, because it's the only sword that wasn't taken by like 6 other people, even though Mangetsu technically wielded all of them. Chojiro is probably the weakest Kage we've ever seen, but that doesn't mean he's weak. Simply being the 5th Mizukage, 6th Mizukage? 6th Mizukage means that he is an incredibly powerful ninja. He was systematically able to defeat the new wielders of the 7 swords of the mist in the Boruto Hidden in the Mist arc, and that was just with a regular katana. He was able to hang with the Otsutsukis in the Boruto Chunin arc, fighting alongside Darui in the 4th Tsuchikage, and amongst the 5 Kage, he's actually considered the best swordsman and assassin. The Hiramakrai is actually probably the most diverse of all of the 7 swords of the mist, since it is a chakra weapon that can change its shape. When it's released from its bandages, it releases chakra that's stored up inside of it that can then mold into different shapes, like an enormous hammer that knocks Sasuke through a wall even though he's shielded by his Susanoo, or a massive longsword that can cut through multiple people simultaneously. On top of that, because it's a split sword, it can be used in both hands. On top of that, as a Mizukage, he's incredibly talented with water release, being able to create water blades to attack if he doesn't have a sword, or to throw entire surges of water at enemies to subdue them. But unfortunately, he pales in comparison to the last entry on our list. You knew who it was. It's Kisame. Kisame Hoshigaki is terrifying. Even before he had Samehada, he was able to kill the wielder of Samehada.
Surprise feats don't count.
I don't care, he's scary. Just the pure fact that Kisame was able to wield Samehada means that he's a terrifying human being, because like I said earlier, Samehada is able to choose who wields it. If Samehada doesn't like you when you pick it up, it'll shoot spikes out of your handle and impale your hand until you drop it. Kisame made Might Guy open to the 6th gate, and he was fighting a clone, a 30% power clone. Might Guy had to open to the 7th gate to fight Kisame, and he didn't have Samehada. He had so much chakra, he was referred to as the tailless tailed beast. It's why Samehada liked him, because Samehada had a constant flow of chakra from him, and Kisame probably barely noticed. But since we're talking about Samehada, let's talk about Samehada. A, it's shark skin, so if it hits you, you pull and you can rip, and that works for both flesh, bone, and chakra. And it's so effective at absorbing the chakra of the things that it rips that it can apparently absorb 6 tails of a Jin cloak in an instant, according to Killer Bee. It's so powerful at absorbing chakra that it made Killer Bee go from a version 2 Jin cloak to a version 1 Jin cloak. I'm so passionate, I punched my mic. Do you know how much chakra that is? And on top of that, the more chakra it takes in, the more powerful and bigger it gets, which is bad for you because it's sentient. It can extend its handle, attack independently, and you don't want that when it is the size of a truck. On top of that, it was being wielded by a guy who was so powerful that he survived a Killer Bee version 2 lightning lariat to his chest. I mean, it caved his chest in, but he was still alive. The even funner part than that, is that Samehada, identifying when its wielder is hurt, can fuse with their wielder and give it all the chakra that Samehada has absorbed during the fight. This will cause the fused wielder to go insane and rampage until the chakra is gone, but you don't want to be anywhere near that person. Combine this with the fact that he was incredible with water release, being able to cover entire battlefields in water to give himself an advantage and also summon sharks to attack his enemies. Also being able to fire off shark jutsu bombs that can literally bite you in half. And yeah, Kisame is gonna be number 1 on our list. If you had given him Samehada in his fight against Might Guy, he probably would have had to open to the 8th gate a bit earlier than he already did. And Naruto wouldn't have been there to plot armor him back to life. And that's it. That's every member of the 7 Swords of the Mist and what we know about their backgrounds and their swords. I hope you like it because it took me 3 hours to film. So please, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Because if you just sat through this entire video of me talking about an obscure group in Naruto, you are just going to adore it here. I'm not saying that Might Guy could topple a nation, but people said that the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist were strong enough to topple a nation, and he killed 6 out of 7 of them.